The wind carried dust across the parched earth, as though the land itself were sighing, tired from years of giving more than it had to offer. Elias Boone stood at the fence line of his meager ranch, his shoulders stooped beneath a sun that had no mercy. The fields lay dry, grass brittle, and the bones of too many failed seasons weighed heavy in his chest. He had one cow left, a stubborn old thing that kept him tethered to hope, though even that thread was fraying. The neighbors had written him off already, whispering that Boone was as hollow as his barns, and every time he walked into town their eyes clung to his poverty like burrs to cloth. Elias was not a man quick with words, nor one who sought pity. But hunger makes even the proudest men bend. When word reached him of a woman willing to marry in exchange for the dignity of a home and the promise of livestock, he felt the sting of shame before the swell of relief. He told himself it was only practical. Two people surviving together stood a better chance than one fighting alone. Love had no place in such a bargain. And yet, as the day neared, Elias found his sleep troubled by unease. The town gathered in curious knots the morning she arrived. Clara Mayfield descended from the wagon, her traveling dress strained at the seams, dust clinging to its hem. She was not the sort of woman the songs praised or the ballads remembered. Round of face, heavy in form, her presence drew murmurs like moths to flame. Martha Langley, the widow who ran the general store, leaned toward her neighbor with a smirk. "Lord, he's traded for more than he can carry. She won't fit in his doorway." Laughter flitted through the crowd, sharp as a blade disguised as humor. Clara heard it. Her cheeks burned, but her gaze never lifted from the ground. Years had taught her the art of silence, for silence left fewer wounds than retorts no one cared to hear. Yet there was steel in the way she carried her trunk, as though she had long ago accepted the world's cruelty and kept walking despite it. Elias watched her, jaw set, and though his eyes did not linger with desire, neither did they carry the scorn of the others. He stepped forward and offered his hand. She hesitated only a breath before placing hers in his. The ceremony was brief, conducted beneath a fading sky while cicadas droned their endless song. Elias's voice was low but steady as he repeated the vows. Clara's voice trembled, yet she managed each word as though pulling them from a deep well. The townsfolk stood witness, their amusement disguised as interest, their pity unmasked. Sheriff Amos Clay shook his head with a mutter, "A cow for a cow. Boone's run clean out of luck." The phrase scattered like seed on wind, certain to sprout in every corner of gossip. Elias did not answer. He had no appetite for argument, no strength for pride. That night, when they reached his cabin, Clara paused in the doorway. The place was small, walls close enough to make her chest tight, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and loneliness. She traced the room with her eyes. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner. This was to be her life. Elias busied himself with the lantern, setting it low, his movements careful, as though he too felt the heaviness pressing in. He spoke no word of welcome, offered no reassurance. Perhaps he had none to give. When he finally turned, Clara's heart hammered with dread. The vows were still fresh on her tongue, but marriage in the eyes of the law was different than marriage in the shadows of night. She had endured stares, endured laughter, but she could not endure mockery in such intimacy. Her hand went to the bedroom door. With a click of the lock, she drew a line that words could not. Elias stopped short, the sound striking him like a slap. He stood in the dim light, his face unreadable. For a long moment he lingered, and she braced herself for anger, for ridicule, for the demand of rights men often claimed without hesitation. But none came. He simply set the lantern down, dragged a blanket from the trunk, and laid himself before the fire. He closed his eyes, though sleep did not find him quickly. In the silence, Clara listened to the crackle of flames and the steady rhythm of his breath. The wall between them was only a thin plank of pine, yet it might as well have been stone. Morning brought no thaw. Elias went about his work, repairing fences, tending the cow, mending a roof shingle. Clara stayed within, sweeping, cooking, her movements precise but cautious, as though afraid to take up too much space. When he entered to eat, he offered a quiet nod of thanks, nothing more. To any onlooker, theirs was no marriage at all but a business arrangement clothed in vows. But cracks appeared, small and almost invisible. One afternoon, Clara carried buckets from the well, her face red from effort, sweat darkening her dress. The weight was cruel, and her arms trembled. Elias appeared at her side without a word. He lifted the buckets with ease, the cords of his arms straining, and carried them inside. He did not look at her, did not speak, simply set them down and returned to his work. Clara, standing in the doorway, felt something shift, something fragile like the first green shoot breaking through dry soil. The town, however, was relentless. At the store, Martha Langley's tongue wagged like a bell. "Boone's bought himself a wife who locks him out at night. Reckon even the cows laugh at him." The others chuckled, their eyes sliding toward Clara when she came to trade for flour. She kept her shoulders squared, though every word pressed like a stone upon her chest. Returning home, she avoided Elias's gaze, ashamed not of herself but of the burden she feared she had brought him. Yet Elias said nothing of the gossip. If he heard it, he buried it deep, as he did with every pain life handed him. His silence was not warmth, but it was not cruelty either. It was a kind of endurance, a language she recognized in her own marrow. They were two people who knew the taste of scorn, who had learned to weather storms not by fighting them but by bending until the wind passed. One evening, as the sun fell behind the hills, Elias sat on the porch sharpening his knife. Clara watched from inside, her sewing idle in her lap. He looked older in the fading light, his eyes shadowed, his skin lined with weariness. For the first time she wondered what grief had carved him hollow, what loss had made him marry a stranger for the price of survival. She wanted to ask but dared not. Instead she lit the lamp, letting its glow reach him through the window, a quiet gesture of presence. Elias glanced up, saw the light, and for a brief moment their eyes met through the glass. It was not a look of passion nor of joy, but something simpler, acknowledgment, a silent admission that neither was as invisible as they believed. Clara turned away, heart pounding, as though that single glance carried the weight of a spoken vow. And so the days stretched, a fragile rhythm forming between them. The locked door remained, the silence unbroken, yet beneath it something stirred. Not love, not yet, but the faintest hum of possibility, like the whisper of rain on distant hills. And though neither would name it, both felt the pull, the sense that what began as a bargain was quietly shifting into something neither had dared to hope for. The sky had grown harsher with every passing week, the clouds retreating farther from the Boone ranch as if they no longer remembered the land below. Elias worked from dawn until the stars returned, sweat darkening his shirt, hands raw with labor that bore little fruit. He said nothing of despair, but Clara saw the way his shoulders sagged when he thought no one was watching. The drought was not just stealing grass from the pastures, it was gnawing at the fragile hope that had held them together through their uneasy beginning. The cow he had fought so hard to keep grew thin, ribs pressing through its hide, and though Elias never spoke aloud, Clara could hear the silent tally of losses in every movement he made. The town's whispers carried farther than the wind. At the general store, Sheriff Amos leaned against the counter, voice pitched just loud enough for Clara to hear. Boone's cursed himself. Took a wife for a cow, and now the cow's dying just the same. Laughter followed, brittle as glass. Clara kept her head bowed, hands firm on the sack of flour she carried, but her ears burned. She had lived a life in the shadows of ridicule, but hearing his name dragged into it carved deeper wounds. She hurried home, shame and sorrow pressing down like an anvil. That evening, as Elias came in from the fields, he found her at the table, mending his shirt by the glow of lamplight. Her stitches were precise, each loop of thread steady despite the trembling of her fingers. She did not look up when he entered, nor did she speak. But Elias stopped in the doorway, staring at the quiet devotion in her work. For the first time, he felt something stir beyond necessity, a recognition that this woman, mocked and judged by the world, was giving him more than survival. She was giving him dignity in ways words could not. The nights remained cold with silence. The locked door had become a wall neither dared to cross, but small fissures appeared in its weight. One stormy evening, when the wind howled through cracks in the cabin and rain battered the roof, Elias woke to a sound he had not heard since childhood. Clara's voice, soft and tremulous, carried through the wood. She was singing an old hymn, each note fragile yet threaded with something eternal. Elias rose, bare feet whispering against the floorboards, and moved toward the door she always locked. He did not reach for the handle. Instead, he rested his hand against the wood and whispered, voice hushed as though speaking to memory itself, "That song, my mother used to hum it." On the other side, silence stretched, and then Clara's breath hitched. She did not answer, but she did not stop singing. Elias stood there until the last note faded, heart heavy with an emotion he could not name. He returned to his place by the fire, unable to sleep, yet warmed by the strange intimacy of that shared moment. It was not long after that the ranch faced its most brutal trial. One sweltering afternoon, lightning struck dry grass near the barn, and in a heartbeat flames devoured the brittle stalks. Elias ran without hesitation, racing into the barn where his last cow bellowed in terror. Smoke swallowed him whole, choking his lungs, searing his eyes. He reached the animal, tugging at its halter, but a beam above gave way, crashing down onto his shoulder and pinning him to the dirt. Pain blazed through him, and he roared against it, but the weight was too great. Clara, hearing the crash, ran from the cabin. Townsfolk had gathered at a distance, drawn by the smoke, but none stepped forward. They stood frozen, murmuring, unwilling to risk themselves for a man they believed already lost. Clara's heart thundered, but she did not pause. She plunged into the inferno, skirts catching sparks, hair whipping with heat. Inside, she saw Elias trapped, the beam pressing him into the dirt, his face twisted with agony. Without thinking, she braced her legs and heaved against the burning timber. Her arms shook, fire singed her sleeves, but she pushed with every ounce of strength born from years of carrying burdens the world mocked her for. With a guttural cry, the beam shifted and Elias crawled free. Together, coughing and stumbling, they dragged the cow out into the night air. Flames roared behind them, devouring the barn, but life had been salvaged. The crowd stared, wide-eyed, as Clara collapsed to her knees, dress charred, skin streaked with soot. Sheriff Amos, hat in hand, muttered low, "Well, I'll be damned." The laughter that had haunted her for years dissolved into silence. For once, no one dared mock. They had seen her strength, and it had remade her in their eyes. Elias, still gasping, turned to her. Through the haze of smoke and pain, his vision cleared enough to see not her body, not the shape others mocked, but the courage blazing within her. For the first time since their vows, he truly looked at her, and what he saw stole his breath. He reached for her hand, calloused fingers wrapping gently around hers, and though he said nothing, the weight of that touch was louder than any declaration. That night, after the flames died and the crowd dispersed, Elias sat before the fire, his shoulder bound where Clara had tended him. She moved quietly about the cabin, exhaustion written across her body, but he could not take his eyes from her. At last, he rose, each step measured, and approached the bedroom door. For weeks it had been locked, a barrier of shame and fear. He did not knock. Instead, he placed his hand against the wood, his voice low and unsteady. "You saved me, Clara. You saved more than me." For a long moment, silence reigned. Then came the soft scrape of metal, the lock turning. The door creaked open, revealing Clara, her figure trembling in the shadows. She did not speak, but her eyes glistened with something Elias had not seen before: trust. He stepped inside, not with hunger, not with demand, but with reverence, as though entering a sanctuary. The cabin seemed to exhale. The world beyond their walls could mock and scorn, but within that room, something sacred bloomed. They did not need words to name it. It was in the gentleness of his hand at her shoulder, in the steadiness of her gaze as she allowed him close. It was the simple truth that two broken souls, brought together by desperation, had found a bond forged in fire. Outside, the night stretched vast and endless, stars scattered like seeds across the sky. Inside, two hearts began to mend, not through sudden passion but through the quiet recognition that survival had given way to something greater. The locked door had been a fortress of shame, but now it stood open, and with it, so did the possibility of love. Perhaps the townsfolk would still whisper, perhaps laughter would still follow them down the street. But Elias no longer cared, and Clara no longer bowed beneath it. For they had seen each other in the flames, and what they found was worth more than a herd of cattle or the judgment of neighbors. It was worth everything. And in the hush of that night, as the fire crackled low and the scent of smoke lingered in the air, Elias Boone finally let himself breathe, not as a man defeated, but as one who had been saved.